JAMB 2026 candidates, you are welcome to today's lecture, the continuation of our biology lecture, Operation Destroying the JAMB syllabus. All right, so we don't have time, so get your pen and your biology notebook to jot down whatever you understand of this lecture, and let's carry on. We don't have time again. The exam don't too near, so we don't have time. So today we are continuing with transport in organisms. And what is the transport in organism? We have various means of transportation in organism. What's the need for transportation in living organism? As organisms increase in size and complexity, they require efficient system to move essential material like nutrients, water and gases from one part of their body to another. This prevents accumulation of waste and ensures cells receive what they need, okay? For example, in plants, transport supports growth and photosynthesis, while in animal, it maintains homeostasis and energy supply. So, what is the need for transportation? To prevent accumulation of waste and also to transport nutrients to every part of the living organisms where those nutrients are needed. These are the primary functions of the transportation in living organism. For plants, transport supports growth and photosynthesis, while in animals, it maintains homeostasis, which is the regulation of the internal environment to maintain constants, okay? Constants, ensuring that there is constant, function of the internal environment. Everything that is going on inside our body, that's homeostasis. What are the materials for transportation in living organisms? Key materials for transportation in living organisms include excretory products such as urea, gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide, manufactured food such as sugar, digested food such as amino acid, nutrients such as minerals, water and hormones. All these are needed to be transported. All these are transportation materials. These are transported in forms like dissolved solutes or gases. They all dissolve in the blood or in plants, dissolved solutes or transported as gases. What are the channels for transportation? The first one we have here is mammalian circulatory system. When we say the channels for transportation, we are trying to say the means for transportation. In mammals, it is the circulatory system that is the means for transportation. So, the circulatory system includes the heart, which pumps blood, the arteries, which carries oxygenated blood away from the heart. So, the arteries carries oxygenated blood away from the heart, while the veins returns the oxygenated blood to the heart. And capillaries is the site of exchange, okay? That's where oxygenated blood turns to deoxygenated blood. That's where oxygen diffuses out of the blood and carbon dioxide diffuses into the blood, okay? The system is closed and double circulated. So it's both closed and double circulation, okay? Pulmonary circulation and what? Systemic circulation or systemic circuit. That's what you need to know here, okay? So before we continue, the biggest vein in the body is vena cava or vena cava, while the biggest artery in the body is aorta. Now, the channel for transportation in plants, you have the vascular system, okay? And the vascular system comprises of the phloem, which transports sugar and hormones from leaf to storage organs, okay, in the plant. And you also have the xylem that transports water and minerals from the roots to the leaf. We have discussed this before in the past. So now let's look at the structure of the blood. What is the blood composed of? What is the composition of the blood? What is it made of? This is a test tube containing the blood, okay? This is a test tube containing the blood, and this blood has been centrifuged. As soon as you centrifuge the blood, you get what is called the Buffy coat, okay? This is the Buffy coat. This formation of coats here, clogged coat here, is called the Buffy coat, okay? And the Buffy coat is divided into two layers. The upper layer of the Buffy coat represents the what? The white blood cells, while the lower layer here of the Buffy coat represents the platelets. The white blood cell and the platelets together makes up less than 2% of the blood. So less than 2% of the blood is made up of white blood cells and platelets. You know the functions of white blood cell now. White blood cell is the defense of the body system, okay? They protect the body from foreign body, especially living foreign body, where they help to fight infection and inflammation. Then platelets, the function of platelet is for clotting of blood, okay? Like when you injure, the platelet helps to what? To aggregate, to clothe the injury site, to ensure that blood doesn't get wasted through that place that is injured, okay? That's why your blood quickly clots and hardens because of these platelets, all right? So the upper part of the test tube contains the plasma, which makes up 52 to 62% of the blood. Here, from here to here, from here to here is the plasma, okay? Makes up 52 to 62% of the blood, all right? Then the down below is where you have the red blood cells, which makes up 38 to 48% of the blood. These are the structures found in the blood when the blood is separated through centrifugation. Now, let's look at the composition of blood. Everything that you have to know as regards the composition of blood. First of all, that peripheral blood that you see, when you injure yourself, that blood that comes out, on where I take a syringe and put it into my vein and drain out some blood, okay, that blood is divided into the plasma. That's what it contains. The plasma, which makes up about averagely 55% of the blood. Then blood further divides into the capsule, the other part of the blood called the capsule, which makes up 45% of the blood. And inside the capsules, you have blood cells like erythrocytes, which is red blood cell. You have leukocytes, which is white blood cell. And you have thrombocytes, which is platelets. And leukocyte is further subdivided into granulocytes and agranulocytes. So this one is granulocyte here. These monocytes and lymphocytes are called agranulocytes because they don't have granules in them. But these are granulocytes, they have granules in them, all right? And the granulocytes includes eosinophil, basophil, and neutrophil. All these they destroy living organisms that attacks the body. All right, that's their function. I'm just giving you their general function, okay, for O level. So under agranulocytes, you have monocytes and lymphocytes. They don't have granules, okay? So you have monocytes and what? Lymphocytes. They also do what? They clear the body system, okay? They clear the body system of bigger, foreign bodies and invaders that the eosinophil, basophil, and neutrophil can't attack. The ones that they can't clear, all these can't clear. That's what the monocyte and the lymphocyte does. They clear those bigger ones. Or those already dead microorganisms in the body, those already dead foreign bodies, those already dead invaders that are now big, that are now cellular matrix. It is this monocyte and lymphocyte that clears them from the blood. This is the composition of the blood. Let's look at the structure of the heart. Okay, to draw the heart is very easy. The human heart has 4 chambers, okay, 2 atrium, okay, which is, look at it here, 1 here, then 2 ventricle, 1 here, 1 here. So this place is called the what? The atrium, the left atrium. Here is called the what? The right atrium. This place here is called the right ventricle, while this place here is called the left ventricle. In the walls of the ventricle, the left is thicker than the right ventricle. Why? Because the left ventricle pumps blood to all the body system, or it pumps blood to the systemic circuits, okay? But the right ventricle only pumps blood to the lungs. So that's why the wall of the left ventricle is thicker than that of the right ventricle, because this one requires more force. It produces more force to pump blood into that systemic circuit, okay? But this only pumps blood to the lungs, okay? That's why the left is thicker than it, all right? So in between the ventricle, you have a space called the ventricular septum, or call it septum, okay? Look at it here, septum, okay? This septum contains fluid that prevents friction between the 2 ventricles. That's the function. It prevents what? Friction between the 2 ventricles, all right? Now, in between the atrium and the ventricle on both sides, here is atrium, here is ventricle, here is atrium, here is ventricle. In between them, you have a gateway valve here. On the right side of the heart, or in between the right atrium and the right ventricle, you have a gateway called atrioventricular valve. And this atrioventricular valve controls blood, the amount of blood that travels from this atrium to the ventricle. Okay, that's what it does. On the left side, in between the left atrium and the left ventricle, you have the atrioventricular valve too there, okay? And what is the function of this atrioventricular valve? It does what? It controls the blood that enters the ventricle through the atrium, okay? Immediately blood enters the ventricle, it closes, preventing blood from backflowing into the atrium during the pumping of this ventricle, or during the contraction of this ventricle, all right? So this valve here that separates the right atrium from the right ventricle is called the tricuspid valve. It's 3 ways, tricuspid. Why this valve here that demarcates or that separates the left atrium from the left ventricle is called the bicuspid valve, all right? JAMB loves setting questions from here, these places, okay? It's called bicuspid valve. It has 2 ways, okay? So when we look at the structures on top of the heart, all these are called the great vessel. Here you have this valve called the pulmonary valve, all right? This is called the pulmonary valve. Here is where blood travels from this ventricle, the right ventricle, to the lungs. Like I said before, the function of the right ventricle is to transport blood to the lungs, okay? This is where it enters the pulmonary trunk. This place here is the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk forms the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery that sends blood to the left and the right lungs, okay? So when this one contracts, blood flows into this place through this pulmonary valve, okay? Or it can also be called semilunar valve. So this big vessel you have here is called the aorta, and it has 3 branches on top of it, okay? This is where blood passes to be transported, and it descends. You have descending branch and ascending branch. All these 3 branches on top of it is the ascending branch. Why the one here, there is one here, this one here around here is the descending branch. That transport blood to other parts of the body or to the systemic circuit, all right? And where is the opening? Where does blood enter this aorta? It is through this place, this valve here. Look at the valve here. Inside this ventricle, this left ventricle, there's a valve here called semilunar valve, okay, or aortic valve, okay? It is through this valve that blood enters this aorta to be transported to the systemic circuit, all right? So these two structure here, this thing here is called the pulmonary vein. This is where the heart receives blood back, all right? Look at it here. The heart receives blood from the lungs through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. Okay, this structure here is the inferior vena cava. Okay, look at it here, the inferior vena cava. All right, it brings blood from the lower part of the heart, below the heart, all the structures that are below the heart, that's all the structures below here. It collects those blood and return it into this what? This right atrium. Okay, then this one is the superior vena cava, which is located on top. Okay, on top, superior vena cava is located on top. And what does it do? It brings all the bloods that are above the heart, all the structures that are above the heart. It collects those blood and bring them into this same right atrium. Okay, because those blood are deoxygenated blood. They are to be placed into this ventricle and sent to the what? To the lungs through this semilunar valve or pulmonary valve. All right, we have understood the structure of the heart. Now what we have to understand now is the function. How does the heart functions? All right, so this is how the heart functions. Since you now understand the structure of the heart, let's understand how the heart functions. All right, so deoxygenated blood that have low oxygen are collected into the heart on the right side, which is this right atrium. Okay, so the ones above the heart, all the structures above the heart, my head, my neck, everything, they are collected into this superior vena cava. Look at this big vessel here, this one. They are collected here, and through here it enters this atrium, right atrium, and all the blood below the heart, all the blood in all the structures collected below the heart, your leg, your waist, your abdomen, and so on, are collected through this inferior vena cava, the lower vena cava, or the posterior vena cava, is collected here and is sent into this same right atrium. As soon as they are collected completely here, this valve opens up. This valve that separates the right atrium from the right ventricle opens, and the blood flows into the right ventricle. Okay, this valve is called what? Remember what we call the valve? It's called the tricuspid valve. All right, tricuspid valve. All right, so it's 3 ways. So as soon as blood flows into this right ventricle, this valve closes. It shuts. Okay, it closes, and this right ventricle contracts. As soon as the right ventricle contracts, this valve here is the pulmonary valve or the semilunar valve. It opens up and blood flows through here into this pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk branches into the pulmonary artery. And anything pulmonary, just know it's lungs. Okay, so it branches into the left and right pulmonary artery. So the left meets or enters the left lungs, while the right pulmonary arteries enter the the right lung. Okay, so this deoxygenated blood is poor in oxygen. Okay, so it's contracted through the right ventricle into this pulmonary trunk, then into the lungs, so that this blood can receive oxygen from the lungs. Okay, immediately this blood enters the lung, diffusion occurs, and this blood receives oxygen, and the blood is now oxygenated blood. And how does this oxygenated blood leave the lungs? Okay, the oxygenated blood is collected from the lungs through this pulmonary vein. Okay, it returns the oxygenated blood, now oxygenated because the lungs has given it oxygen. You know that the lungs is the site of oxygen. Okay, that's where oxygen is produced. Okay, in the human body. Okay, it's collected from the atmosphere, but it's there. Now there all the processing they occur. That's where it's oxygen rich. So the oxygen rich blood or oxygenated blood enters the pulmonary vein. And they are collected. Both the right pulmonary vein collects the one from the right lungs. The left pulmonary vein collects the one from the left lungs, and everything is emptied into this left atrium. Okay, into the left atrium. And as soon as it empties into the left atrium, this valve here that separates the left atrium from the left ventricle, it opens. It's called the bicuspid valve. That's the two. Okay, the two-way valve, the bicuspid valve. It opens and the blood empties into the left ventricle. Okay, remember the left ventricle has the thicker wall because it pumps blood throughout the body, throughout the systemic circuit. It needs a greater force. Okay, that's why it has an adaptive feature of a thicker wall. All right, so immediately blood enters this left ventricle, preventing backflow of this blood into this atrium during contraction. This bicuspid valve closes. Immediately it closes, this ventricle contracts, and as it contracts, it pushes the blood from here into the aorta via the valve. Look at the valve here, the aortic valve here. You are going to appreciate it more here. It pushes the blood through this place into the the aorta, the aortic valve. All right, it is true here that this oxygenated blood now enters the aorta. This branch of the aorta, on top of the aorta, supplies the parts above the above the neck, that's above the heart. Okay, supplies oxygenated blood to those parts. All right, and that's where the heart also gets its own blood supply from. Okay, there is an artery called the coronary artery. The coronary artery branches from this aorta. That's where you have the coronary artery branch. Okay, that supplies the heart oxygen. Okay, oxygenated blood. Okay, then all these three branch on top supplies the structures above the heart. While the descending aorta supplies oxygenated blood to every structure of the body that is below the heart, all the structure of the body that are below the heart. All right, that's what the descending aorta supplies. It supplies them oxygenated blood. So as soon as this blood goes through all the body system, it is collected back again because the blood will now be deoxygenated. It's now going to have a poor oxygen content. All right, so the blood is returned to the body the same way the inferior vena cava, the lower or posterior vena cava, collects the blood from below the heart, all the structures below the heart, while the superior or the anterior vena cava collects all the deoxygenated blood above the heart, and it enters this right atrium, and the cycle continues again. It starts again, just like the way I explained it for you. That's how your heart functions to ensure that oxygenated blood is circulated throughout your body, not just oxygenated blood, solute, nutrients, and so on and so forth. So that's that for that. Complete circulation, all right? The complete circulation of the body. So this ancient diagram, all right, shows the circulation of blood throughout the body system, and it's easy. You see this center here. Here is the heart, okay? Here is the heart, and here is the upper body, that's above the heart, all right? Then here is leg, below the heart. All the structures you have below the heart is here. What you have here is the right lungs, here, right lungs. This one here is the left lungs, all right? So first of all, the oxygenated blood is collected into the heart through what? The anterior and the posterior vena cava. Look at the anterior vena cava here, look at it here. It's collected into the heart here through this vena cava. Can you see? And the one below the heart collected through this what? Posterior vena cava. Look at it here. That's where it's collected into the heart. It enters the heart what? The heart right atrium, and if from there it enters the right what? Ventricle, and is pumped into the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Look at it. It enters into the lung through the what? The pulmonary artery. Immediately it enters into the lung. Look at it here. Through the pulmonary artery via the pulmonary trunk. Look at it here. It enters into the lungs. Okay. As soon as this blood receives oxygen, okay, it's returned back to the what? The heart through the pulmonary vein. Okay. Look at it. Into the heart again through the pulmonary vein on both sides, both left and right lungs. Okay. And it is returned to the what? The left atrium. Now the oxygenated blood that's now oxygenated by the lungs flows into what? Or drains into the left ventricle. All right. And as soon as it enters the left ventricle contracts and the blood enters the what? The aorta. This is the aorta. Okay. Through the aorta, the branch that supplies the upper body, okay, goes. Look at the upper body. It goes and it supplies the neck, the brain, and so on and so forth. Okay. The hand, and so on and so forth. Above the heart. While the one that supplies the lower body, look at it here, the descending aorta. Okay. It supplies the lower body. It supplies other structure in the abdomen, such as the intestine, the diaphragm, the large intestine, the small intestine, the liver, the spleen, all the abdominal organs, all the structure, the kidney. Okay, it supplies everything. It goes around like this. You can see the circuit like this, goes down, supplies the legs, supplies the penis, supplies the vagina, supplies the butt, supplies the leg, supplies your toe. And you can see it's not going up. So immediately as it's supplying all these body parts, the body parts are using up the oxygen in the blood. The cells are using up the oxygen. It diffuses into the capillary. There's exchange. Okay, exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide by the cell. So the cell collects oxygen and returns carbon dioxide back to the blood. So at the end, what we now get in turn is a blood that is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. And such blood is called deoxygenated blood, and is transported back into this posterior vena cava, going back to the heart again for another oxygenation, because it's going to be pumped into the lungs for oxygenation, and it's returned back into the heart to be pumped back throughout the body, throughout the circuit. So this movement of the blood like this is a continuous process. It's called the systemic circuit. Okay, when blood is pumped to the lungs, it's called the single circulation. All right, when the blood returns back to the heart and to be pumped back into the circuit, the complete circuit, is called double circulation. Okay, that's why circulation in humans or in mammals, they experience what? Double circulation. So that's how everything continues to maintain life. That's how it continues all your lifetime. It continues like that. Let's look at the media and processes of transportation. Media of transportation includes cytoplasm in multicellular organisms. Okay, it's helping transportation of nutrients. Okay, remember cytoplasm is jelly-like. Okay, and it has some few organelles in it. All right, so cell sap in plants. All right, you know what cell sap does now? It transports water. All right, so you have the body fluid in insects. Okay, in insects you have body fluid, and insect has waste such as uric acid. Okay, that's the waste product in insects. Okay, uric acid. All right, blood in vertebrates, which contains plasma, red blood cell, white blood cells, and platelets. We already explained this. And also lymph. All right, lymph is also part of the circulatory system. All right, inside the circulatory system you have the lymphatic system in it too. Okay, which consists of the fluid called lymph. Okay, it's fluid from tissue and aid in immune response and defense. All right, so the function of the lymphatic system is to protect the body against infection and diseases. All right, so it's a fluid tissue. Okay, lymphatic tissue. Okay, it cleans the tissue and drains them at every different successive lymph nodes, such as the abdominal lymph drain, the abdominal lymph glands. You have the lumbar lymph glands. You have the thoracic lymph glands. You have a lot of lymph glands. Okay, so let's stop there. All right, let's see processes next. The processes of transport include diffusion. All right, movement of substance from high to low concentration. All right, so for example, gases in the lungs. So gases, where you have high concentration of oxygen gas, for example, is going to move from that place to where you have low concentration of oxygen gas. Where you have high concentration of carbon dioxide gas, Carbon dioxide is going to move from that high concentration to where you have low concentration of that carbon dioxide gas. That is how carbon dioxide and oxygen is exchanged between the tissue and the blood. All right. So osmosis is also there as a means or a media of transportation. And osmosis is the movement of water molecule across semi-permeable membrane from a region of a lower concentration to a region of a higher concentration. For example, the root absorption in plants, where the roots of the plant absorb water molecule from a region of lower concentration in the soil to a region of a higher concentration, okay, where it takes it up to the plant through the root hair, into the roots, then to the what? The xylem. The next we have here is through plasmolysis. It's also a media of transport, and it involves cell shrinkage due to water loss. So when water is lost from the plant cell, the cell continues to shrink as a response to what? To water loss. The third process of transportation is what? Cell swelling for support. So cell turgidity, okay, is cell swelling. So when the cell receives too much water, the cell swells up. That's the response to high water content. Okay, that's the response to what? To transportation process. When water moves in, too much water moves into the cell swells. But when less water moves into the cell shrinks. That's plasmolysis in plants. All right. So that's that for that. Still under the continuation, active transport. Energy required movement against concentration gradients. All right. In active transport, energy is required for the movement of molecules. Okay. For example, the uptake of ions in roots. All those mineral ions in roots. The uptake for the root to be able to pull those ions from the soil to other parts of the plant, it needs a pump. Okay. It needs a pump. It needs energy to pull it. For example, requiring potassium pump. Potassium pump is a common one that is required to pull nutrients or ions from the roots to other parts of the plant. All right. So that's active transport. So active transport is active. It requires energy. All right. It requires energy for uptake to function. All right. So the next is transpiration pool. And transpiration pool is water movement in plants via evaporation from leaf. So water moves out of the plant through the evaporation of water from the leaf. That is transpiration pool. All right. So there's one experiment that is normally used to demonstrate or test for transpiration in plants, whereby you put a plant inside a glass jar and you put calcium oxide inside that system. As soon as the calcium oxide turns to calcium hydroxide, that shows, or that's an evidence that transpiration has occurred in the system, because slakline, which is calcium hydroxide, was produced due to the reaction, or as a result of the reaction between the water transpired by the leaf and the calcium oxide. Now, the next we have here is root pressure. Okay, root pressure. Pressure from roots pushing water upward. All right, pressure from roots pushing water is this sucking pressure of the roots. Okay, pushes water upward from the soil into the plant. Then we have open circulation in animals, for example, insects and fishes. You know, fish has a kind of heart, two chambered heart, just one atrium and one ventricle. Okay, it has an open circulation. Blood doesn't flow to the lungs, or there's nothing like lungs. Okay, because it's, you know, it breathes with its gills, and the oxygen in the gills just diffuse directly from the gills into the blood. All right, so it does not require a double circulation where blood returns from the lungs back to the heart, then is pumped back into the body like how it is in the mammals. No, or in the human heart. No, it's just open circulation, and it's single circulation pumped into the open. All right, the open, there's no circuit. All right, is open, no blood vessels. Okay, there's only one vessel for both all the fluid, like lymph in animal, for example. All the fluids in the body mixes with blood, everything mixed together. Is open circulation, no circuits, unlike in humans or in mammals, where you have blood vessels like the arteries, the veins, and the capillary. All right, general circulatory system description. Functions of, you know, the parts of the circulatory system, or the vessels of the circulatory system. It includes hepatic portal vein. It carries nutrients from the gut to the liver. So it is through this hepatic portal vein that the liver receives nutrient-rich blood that the liver then transports throughout the body. The next we have here is pulmonary veins / arteries. Okay, the pulmonary veins / arteries, for the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. Okay, pulmonary vein is only the vein in the body that carries oxygenated blood, while the pulmonary artery is the only artery in the body that carries deoxygenated blood. Okay, so the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood to the heart, while the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood away from the heart, all right, into the lungs. All right, so pulmonary vein is taking blood out of the lungs and into the heart, while pulmonary artery is taking blood out of the heart and into the lungs. All right, then the aorta distributes oxygen. Then the aorta distributes what? Oxygenated blood throughout the body, both on the upper part of the body and the lower part of the body. Then this one we have here is renal artery / vein. The renal artery takes blood to the kidney. It is through the renal artery that blood enters the kidney. The renal vein, it is through this renal veins that blood leaves the kidney after filtration. All right. Now let's look at respiration. Respiratory organs and the surfaces. Respiration involves gaseous exchange and energy release. That is respiration. Gas is exchanged and energy is released through metabolism. All right, so that is the complete definition of respiration. Gas is exchanged and energy is released in turn. Okay, in turn from the gaseous exchange, energy is released as a result of what? Metabolism. The surfaces and organs of respiration include body surface, for example, earthworm and amoeba, also frogs. Frog, respire with their body surface. All right. Then you also have the gills present in fish. Filaments for what? Water oxygen. The gill filaments. The filaments in the gill. That's where the major gaseous exchange in the gill occur. The gill filament. All right. That's the functional unit of the gill. All right. So we have the trachea in insects. Trachea tube in insect. It's called trachea tube. Actually, the full name. Trachea tube in insect. And the trachea tube is an air tube that enables insects to respire. All right. You have the lungs in mammal. Okay. And the lungs here in mammal, you have the alveoli, which is the functional unit of the lung where gaseous exchange occurs. All right. If they ask you now, what is the functional unit of the gills? The gills in fishes. All right. It is the filament. All right. Gill filament. You also have other parts of the gill known as the gill raker, and so on and so forth. But the gill filament is the functional unit of the gill. Then in plants, you have the stomata and the lenticels. Okay. In plants, the stoma is found in the leaf. The stomata, they are found in the leaf. The opening and closing of the stomata is controlled by the guard cells. Okay. And in the stem, you have some opening in the stem, small opening in the stem called lenticel. Okay, its functions is for gaseous exchange of gas, carrying in oxygen, giving out carbon dioxide, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at the mechanism of gaseous exchange. Okay, in plants, when we say the mechanism of gaseous exchange, we are talking how does this gaseous exchange occur. Okay, I've explained this thing before, but let's look at it again. All right, because I want you to understand better. That's why I'm re-explaining it again. All right. So in plants, the mechanism, the pattern as which gaseous exchange occur, the cascade, it occurs via stomata. Okay, opening and closing of stomata, which is controlled by guard cell, responds towards light, carbon dioxide and water. So in response to light, the presence of light, which is sunlight, carbon dioxide and water, the stomata opens and closes to take in carbon dioxide and bring out what? Oxygen. That's it. And in lenticel, okay, both the lenticel and the stomata found in the leaf, stomata in the leaf, lenticel in the stem of the plant or in the back of the plant. All right, carbon dioxide enters for photosynthesis, while oxygen and water vapor exits. So the plant takes in carbon dioxide and uses that carbon dioxide for photolysis, the splitting of water molecule during photosynthesis. And as soon as the water molecule is splitted, oxygen is given out and water vapor is also given out. So the waste from plant respiration is oxygen and water vapor. Remember, this is during the day. During the night, plant respires like normal humans or normal mammal. They take in oxygen and they give out carbon dioxide as waste. All right. So when plant is not photosynthesizing, they take in carbon dioxide and bring out oxygen. When plants are photosynthesizing, when they are making food, they take in carbon dioxide and bring out oxygen as waste. Okay, that's how they breathe. Okay, or that's how they respire. But when they are not photosynthesizing, usually in the dark for night, they take in oxygen and bring out carbon dioxide and water vapor, just like normal mammals and humans. All right. So in animals, it involves diffusion across surfaces. So in animals, we have what is called the surface respiration. For example, alveoli in lungs helps the diffusion of the gases. All right, like I said before, diffusion from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration until concentration gradient is what strucken. Okay, until a balance is strucken. Okay, diffusion is going to continue occurring until there's a concentration gradient. There's a concentration balance. If the concentration of this side is if the concentration of the tissue is 50%, the concentration of the blood should be 50% too. That's the concentration gradient. Balance between the two sides. It all depends on the side. Is it between the blood and the tissue? Is it between the blood and the capillary? So it depends on the side. Okay. So you also have gill in water. All right. Gill in water is used by fish. Okay. Gill, fishes possess gills. Okay. Okay. So there is diffusion. There is still concentration gradient here from the blood of the fish. All right. Oxygen binds to hemoglobin in the blood and form what? Oxyhemoglobin. Okay. As soon as this oxyhemoglobin come in contact with body tissue, it reacts reversibly to give out that oxygen, and the oxygen diffuses out of the blood into the tissue because of concentration gradients, like I explained in the past. And the tissue uses it to form energy, and during aerobic respiration, to form energy through catabolism, carbon dioxide is released as waste. Okay. So the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water vapor. So the lung is not only a respiratory organ, it is also an excretory organ. It helps us excrete excess water, it helps us excrete excessive heat, and it helps us excrete what? Excessive carbon dioxide. Those are the functions of the lungs. And let's look at aerobic respiration. Like we discussed earlier, aerobic respiration requires oxygen. Uses oxygen to break down glucose into carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. ATP is the energy formed. All right, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. It involves glycolysis. What is glycolysis? The breakdown of glycogen. Okay. In the cytoplasm, that's where it occurs. Glucose is converted to pyruvate and to ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, the energy. Then after this, the Krebs cycle, it enters the Krebs cycle. Okay, the Krebs cycle where the mitochondria converts this pyruvate to carbon dioxide. Okay, and the energy that we can use. This energy is the 2 ATP, 2 adenosine triphosphate. We can't use this one. All right. So the Krebs cycle is where the main conversion occurs. Pyruvate is converted to carbon dioxide, and this NADH, it produces the equivalence of 38 adenosine triphosphate per glucose. That's it produces this energy per glucose. All right. So that's how glucose is formed from aerobic respiration. Okay, let's quickly take a summary of it. All right, so oxygen is taken into the system, and oxygen facilitates glycolysis. Glycogen is breaking down, okay, in the cytoplasm. Glucose is converted. Remember, when glycolysis occurs, glucose is formed. So the glucose form is converted to pyruvate and 2-ATP. The body can't use this 2-ATP, and the body can't also use this pyruvate. So it enters the Krebs cycle. So in the Krebs cycle, the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, breaks down this pyruvate to carbon 2 oxide, NADH, and adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the energy. And per glucose, 38 ATP is formed. Now let's look at the opposite of aerobic respiration, which is the anaerobic respiration, which involves the respiration without oxygen. Oxygen is not required. An example of anaerobic respiration is the fermentation. For example, when yeast ferments glucose or starch to form ethanol. Okay, how does it occur? Okay, glucose is broken down by yeast in the absence of oxygen or the presence of limited supply of oxygen to form ethanol, carbon 4 oxide, and energy. So in muscles, anaerobic respiration also occurs in muscles, okay? Because when your muscles begin to receive limited supply of oxygen, the oxygen supply is not enough, they are going to switch from the normal aerobic respiration to anaerobic respiration. And immediately as they switch to this anaerobic respiration, it is going to cause the buildup of lactic acid, because lactic acid is also one of the products or the byproducts of anaerobic respiration. So in anaerobic respiration, you are going to have substance like carbon 4 oxide, energy, ethanol, and lactic acid. All right. So when this lactic acid builds up in your muscles, that is when you start experiencing fatigue, the one you call muscle pull. Okay. Maybe when you run, your muscle is not used to that. Oxygen depletes and your muscle switches to anaerobic respiration. Okay. Lactic acid builds up and it leads to what? Acidosis, which later in turn turns to what? A condition called muscle pull. You start experiencing muscle fatigue. The muscle tires. Okay. The muscle tires, and there's going to be distortion between contraction and relaxation. All right. When the muscle is supposed to contract, it will relax. When it's supposed to relax, it will contract. Sustained contraction, the muscle is just going to contract involuntarily. You are not going to be able to control the muscle again. It's not going to relax, and that can cause an excruciating pain. So this anaerobic respiration is demonstrated with the yeast in sugar solution. When you add yeast to a sugar solution, the yeast converts this sugar solution to ethanol, carbon 2 oxide, and energy. So those are the products of anaerobic respiration. Now let's look at the respiratory system of man. Okay, this is the respiratory system of man. All right. You have the nasal cavity and the oral cavity. It joins and forms the pharynx. All right. Here is the oropharynx. Here is the what? The nasopharynx. All right. And it forms the laryngopharynx. All right. This place, this portion here, where the oropharynx and the nasopharynx join, is called the laryngopharynx. And below is the larynx, which is also called the voice box. Remember, the pharynx is also called the throat. The larynx is also called the voice box. All right. So the vocal cords of the larynx is open, is patent, open, so that air can enter. Okay, so air enters from the nostril or from the mouth. Okay, it's the same pathway. All right, it enters into where? Into the larynx, and from the larynx it enters into the trachea. Okay, this is the trachea directly connecting the larynx. Then the trachea forms what is called a structure that is called the bronchus, and the bronchus forms another structure that is inside the lungs called the bronchioles. Okay, the bronchioles. Okay, so the air enters to this trachea, then into the bronchi, then into the bronchioles, then into the what? The alveoli in the lungs. All right, that is the pathway of the movement of air. Okay, remember this trachea is also called windpipe. That's another name for the trachea. So this one is the left lung, this one is the right lung. All right, this is the base of the lung, and this is the what? The diaphragm. The diaphragm controls the entrance and excision of air in the lungs. You can see the shape of this diaphragm now. This particular shape of this diaphragm, that it is well curved, is called the dome shape of the diaphragm. Okay, the dome shape of the diaphragm. So here, in between the lungs and the rib, you have a cavity called the pleural cavity. You have inside that cavity, you have a fluid called the pleural fluid. And this fluid, what is the function of this fluid? This fluid helps to reduce friction between the wall of the chest and the lungs. So it reduces friction between the wall of the chest and the lungs. When the lungs is filling up, it reduces that friction to prevent wear and tear of the lungs or the tissue surrounding the lungs. All right. So you can see this place. All right. This place is where you have the heart. And the heart is usually deviated or bent towards the left side. It enters the left lung. Okay, there's a notch for the heart in the left lung. All right, so this is the diaphragm. Okay, you can see the shape of this diaphragm. It's called dome shape. Okay, very curved. Okay, the diaphragm gets this shape when the air in the lungs has been expelled. So during exhalation or after exhalation, that is when the diaphragm maintains this kind of shape. All right, when the lung is filled with air, that's during inhalation. This diaphragm is not going to be curved again. It's almost going to be almost straight, but it's not going to be straight. It is now like this, like this. like this when there's air in the lung. But when there's no air in the lung, it becomes dome shape like this. When there's air in the lung, it becomes like this. When there's no air in the lung, dome shape like this. Curved, well curved. All right. So air enters through the laryngopharynx, enter the larynx. From the larynx, it enters into the trachea. From the trachea, it enters into the bronchus. Okay. From the bronchus, it enters into the bronchiole, and from the bronchiole, it enters into the tiny sac. That is the functional unit of the lung, the alveoli sac. That's where gaseous exchange occurs. Okay. It enters into that sac. Blood, oxygen, or diffusion of gases occur. Oxygen from the region of concentration, higher and lower concentration, depending on the concentration. The concentration gradient is struck between the two sides. That's between the alveoli and the capillaries in the lungs. All right. So the blood there, carbon 4 oxide diffuses out of the blood. Then oxygen in the lungs that it gets from air. You know that the lungs receive blood through the heart. All right. So this air, oxygenated air, diffuses. Because the lungs have a high concentration of oxygen, it forces oxygen to diffuse into the blood. It forces oxygen to enter or diffuse into the blood that enters the lungs, okay, from the heart. Because that blood that enters the lungs through the heart is poor in oxygen and rich in carbon 4 oxide. And since that blood is rich in carbon 4 oxide, because the internal environment of the lungs is poor in carbon 4 oxide, is going to make carbon 4 oxide to diffuse out of that blood into this airway to be what? Excreted out of the body through the windpipe, that's the trachea and the larynx. So breathing in and breathing out due to diffusion, breathing in and breathing out, breathing in and breathing out. That's how it happens. So one very important part of this circulatory system is where JAMB normally sets question. Where JAMB will ask you during inspiration, what happens to the intercostal muscle? Okay. So first of all, let's explain what is intercostal muscle. Inter means around, okay, in between. Costa means relating to the thorax, okay, to the ribs, okay, that's costa. All right. We also have costal cartilage, but let's leave that. Intercostal muscle means the muscles between the ribs, and that muscles between the ribs, it aids in respiration, it aids in the movement of the chest, it aids in the filling and the emptying of the lungs. All right. So the intercostal muscle is of two types. You have the external intercostal muscle and you have the internal intercostal muscle. All right. So during inspiration, when you breathe in, the internal intercostal muscle relaxes. Remember, air is going inside. Anytime air is going inside, just you have that as, you use that as your rule of thumb. That anytime that air is going inside, there need to be a relaxed environment for air to enter. If the environment is not relaxed, air will not enter. So during inspiration or breathing in, when the person takes in air into the lungs, the internal intercostal muscle relaxes, while the external intercostal muscle contracts. The external intercostal muscle contracts during inhalation, while the internal intercostal muscle relaxes so that air can enter. And that is where the diaphragm, we now have this kind of shape. Okay, this kind of shape. Okay, it is no longer concave, okay, in shape. Okay, during exhalation, the diaphragm pushes the lung upwards to help compress the lungs. Okay, so that the air can exit the lungs. All right, so the diaphragm will now have this shape. The current shape you are seeing now, the dome shape, is called the dome shape, like this. It will now be well curved. All right. So during exhalation, when air is about to leave the lungs, the internal intercostal muscle now contracts to force air out of the lungs. Then the external one does what? It relaxes so that air can come out. Now let's look at the gaseous exchange in the surface, which is in the alveolar, the tiny alveoli sac. All right. This one you are having, this is, you know, the alveoli is microscopic. All right. So this is the one coming from the bronchioles. Okay. Air that is coming from the windpipe in and out is the same pathway in and out. So this air that is coming from here, the one that is coming in, for example, let's treat the one that is coming in first. The air that is coming in is coming from the environment, and that air is rich in oxygen. So that air or oxygen enters into this alveoli sac here, and because of diffusion, this one is the capillary. Remember, the lungs receive blood, okay, the oxygenated blood from the heart that need to be oxygenated to be transported to the body. So that blood flows in this capillary. Because this blood here is low in oxygen and this air here is high in oxygen, it forces oxygen, because of diffusion gradient, it forces oxygen to enter into this capillary blood. This blood we found in this capillary. Oxygen diffuses into the blood until what? Balance is what's struck. That's how, because there is high carbon dioxide in this capillary blood and there is low carbon dioxide in this air here in this alveoli sac, it forces the diffusion, or it induces the diffusion of carbon 4 oxide out of this out of this capillary into this airspace of the alveoli. All right. So that's how carbon 4 oxide escape and enters here and is exited out. So while you take in oxygen, all right, this one is the breathe out, while the oxygen diffuses into the capillary and is to be sent back to the to the heart via the pulmonary vein. All right.